So, Mr. Grant, I see that you went into the military after high school. Was there a reason for that?
Yeah, the war was on. There was a war.
The big one.
We were fighting the Japs and the Germans, and that's all. It was a different era. I mean, that's all we talked about. I mean, we were at war. Now, the things about that is the unknown. I mean, what was Germany's aspirations, and why did Japan attack us? We didn't have privy to all that information. All we knew was they were the bad guys. And the Japanese, they didn't know any day they're going to, invade Hawaii or come into the West Coast or Alaska. And we didn't know what the Germans, what their intentions were. We were a lot of lack of information and of the unknown. So, we were on a full war basis. I mean, the war was the number one thing in our lives. Your job, you had all kinds of rationing and scrap collecting and bond selling and guys coming and going and dying, friends, relatives. It was a traumatic time that we went through it a little bit in Vietnam, but nothing like a world war. That was Vietnam, way down there somewhere, but and everybody, everybody knew people who were in the service. Everybody knew people who got killed, and they came home wounded and shot up and everything. So it was a very real, you talk about traumatic now with this COVID. During the war, it was a lot worse. I'll tell you that.
How did you end up at Great Lakes Air Base for training?
How what?
How did you end up at Great Lakes Air Base?
At Naval Base.
Naval Base, sorry.
Yeah, naval. I was in the Navy. Well, I think.
I know we went over it yesterday.
Yeah, I know. Now, if I wanted to join the Marines, but if I joined the Marines, it's going to be maybe 3 months before I got in. So just out of high school, a week after I got out of high school, I made these arrangements ahead of time. I joined the Navy because I could go within a week. I was down in Great Lakes, so I could get in the Navy sooner than I could get in the Marines. And I wanted to get in the service. I wanted to, I keep emphasizing the war was on. You don't have that, that kind of a mental background that we had in those days. I mean, we just hated the Japanese. We hated the Germans. They killed our neighbors, killed our family members, killed our friends. It was a different time.
Did you have any idea that you were going to be playing football when you were at Great Lakes Naval Base, or did you think you were just going to be there a short time and then head overseas to fight?
I did not know what was going on behind the scenes, other than I mentioned in our earlier conversation that the coach at Wisconsin had alerted Paul Brown, who's coach, and they were all, it's a coaching society, that that I was going to be in the Navy when that transpired, and to be on the lookout. He was building a football team, and so they contacted me. I didn't I didn't go to them and said I want to play football. They contacted me and a couple of we had some other high school kids there, but I think there was only 2 or 3 of us that made the football team right out of high school without some kind of a college experience or pro experience, 1 or 2 years in college or whatever. There were very few, but there was about 300 that turned out. They opened it up for everybody. We scrimmaged every day, so they got an idea who could run, tackle, and catch and throw, or whatever the term is.
You mentioned that one of your teammates was Marion Motley.
Yes.
Did you realize how great of a player he was going to become?
I don't have that kind of perceptions. All I know, as I mentioned the other day, every time I came down to we had tackling drills every day and blocking drills. It seemed like every time I came up, I was looking across at Marion Motley. And he was, he was 230 pounds or whatever he was, and he was bigger, stronger, faster, older. He beat the crap out of me. But I had to go fight him every day. So yeah, I learned his name and number pretty quick.
Well, what made Paul Brown such a good coach?
Pardon me?
What made Paul Brown such a good coach?
He had the best players. Coaches, as I mentioned, the coaches don't win games. Players win games. You got to get the best players. He spent a lot of time recruiting, and even when he was in the Navy, he knew he was going to go to Cleveland and coach the Browns. So he was already accumulating information, names, numbers, or whatever it was, about players all across the country, ones that might be in the service, might be coming out of the service. And so he had, and I didn't see it, I didn't read the names, but I know he had a list because Blanton Collier, one of his assistants at the Browns and then the head coach at the Browns. But anyway, he had a list of all these players, and they were checking them off. And anybody that ever played football that was in Great Lakes came out to the team. If they didn't, they might be there a day or two or a week or a month, and then they let them go maybe. But he had guys, he had scouts, if that's the right word, or informants. He learned about other kids that were coming out of college or coming out of the service who had already been to college. I mean, he had he was ahead of his time maybe in a lot of things, and one of them was probably his attention to detail and the numbers of players that he had interviewed, or not interviewed, but was interested in and found out about. And he was an organized guy. He was organized.
It's different nowadays than it was back then. Back then, I mean, if you went to like Army, Navy, those are some of the top football programs in the country. You never thought of Great Lakes as like a big time football program back then.
Well, but there was El Toro was a big one, and the one in the East Coast, one in Maryland. I mean, Fort Leonard Woods was they had 30,000 soldiers training at one Army base. Well, there are a lot of football players at Fort Leonard Wood, so they get football teams. So all of those major camps, which are no longer exist. Great Lakes exists, I shouldn't say that, and San Diego, El Toro, they still exist. But they were all, they had a place up in Washington, Navy. I can't remember the name of the place. It was in Idaho. It was a huge. I mean, there were 40,000 troops or naval people training there, in every one of these camps around the country. I mean, we mobilized 500,000 men. And going through training, and well, they all had recreation facilities, and they all had football teams and basketball teams and baseball teams, and they'd play one another, and they'd play the universities. I mean, if you go back and look at your record book, you'll see that there were a lot of games that were in Army and Navy were the two best teams because they had the best players. They were number one, number two in football. Couple of years there with Blanchard and Davis and some of the other guys. I mean, they just had the numbers and players. That's how they became great.
Being a Catholic, every Catholic dreams of playing football in Notre Dame. That'd be a great pleasure to beat Notre Dame when you were at Great Lakes.
Well, that was a big thing, and it became not, I don't know, it was obvious to me at the time, except we kept practicing against Notre Dame, even though we were 3 games before we played, and 4 games we played Notre Dame. We'd run our offense against Notre Dame's defense, what they were running at the time. So he had scouts. He was scouting Notre Dame, Paul Brown was, for all year, because he knew we were going to play them at the end of the year. He knew that they were one of the best teams in the country, and the best way for him to get recognition, not only for Great Lakes, but for himself as a coach, was to beat Notre Dame. Well, Notre Dame has, they played a schedule. They played all the big schools, and they weren't worried about Great Lakes. I mean, their season was, essentially over by the time the end of the season come along. But we had to play one more game, Great Lakes, and Paul Brown we practiced even though we played other teams. Basically, I don't know how much time we spent against Notre Dame defenses. I was on offense at that time. So he prepared for Notre Dame. So he was ready for Notre Dame. Notre Dame wasn't ready for us, I'll tell you that.
You mentioned that one of your assistant coaches on the team was Weeb Eubank, and then he started coaching basketball at Great Lakes. So did you want to play basketball at Great Lakes, or were you kind of pushed into it?
Well, I tell you, playing basketball at Great Lakes is better than being on a battleship over in the China Sea. So, I mean, I had no idea if I was going to be good enough, but going out for the basketball team, I liked playing basketball, and even though, the war was on, and it was just at the end, I got into the tail end. I really didn't get any battle stars or get any action to speak of. It was still playing basketball. So we played. I don't know what the record is. I don't know. We must have played 30 games, and 30 games against top caliber teams, college teams, and that was a great way to spend your time in the service, I'll tell you.
So when you get out of the service, Wisconsin basically convinced you to go to Great Lakes or got you in Great Lakes. Then how did you end up going to Minnesota?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Minnesota, having now been, first of all, raised in in Superior, Wisconsin. Well, in those days we didn't have a car that went very far, so you weren't worldly. I mean, things you heard about, you might have read in magazines or seen some short at the movie newsreel or something, but you really weren't very. Well, now I got in the service, and having played football in all these big stadiums and played basketball in Chicago, arena and Ohio State and Wisconsin, Minnesota, we played all the big arenas. And doing that, you travel. You go places here and there, and you meet, and you get, when I say worldly, whatever that term means, you become, the world is now shrunk a little bit. And so I had a chance to see other schools. I had a chance to see other places. I had a chance to travel in other parts of the country. And I decided, well, what's so great about this school or that? I wasn't concerned necessarily about that, but I'd been away from home for over, almost a year and a half. I wanted to be home, and Wisconsin was 350 miles from Superior. Minnesota was 150. I didn't make any difference to me what school it was. I had no way of rating them or ranking them. I didn't go and spend a week at the campuses. I just, met some of the coaches and I had to, being from Minnesota, I had friends I had fellows that I knew, either I knew them or I knew of them that were going to Minnesota. So that was just a matter of maybe I was homesick. I don't know.
And then Minnesota, they let you play 3 sports. Nowadays, everybody wants everybody to focus on one sport. Was that unique back then, or did they let people play as many sports as they wanted?
Well, if you could make the team, I mean, one of my stipulations was that I wanted to play at least football and basketball. They said they would allow me to do that at most schools. Whether I could or was good enough, we didn't know that, but they'd give me a chance, and that's all I asked for. And so in playing, I was fortunate enough that I was able to play both sports and then play baseball all spring. And when I was playing, and I was on the football team, in those days they had an award, a Chicago Tribune most valuable player award for every school. And the Tribune gave you, I got a couple of, they give you a gold basketball and a chain or a football. Anyway, I won when I was in Minnesota. I was the most valuable player on the football team, selected by the teammates. So I got a nice little football. Well, in my sophomore year, I was most valuable player on the basketball team and the captain of the basketball team at that time. So I got another little gold basketball. So I qualified. It wasn't ever I played, and I was, a valuable member of those teams. And then I played baseball and led the team in hitting my freshman year. And I dropped out of baseball after a couple of years, but just didn't have enough time. But they allowed it.
Did you mention you played club baseball? Or, you played baseball with the town you were in. You said that was huge back then. They got the better players and they paid them. Yep. So you did that while you were in college?
Yes, I did. That's how I got through college. Yeah, I played summer. I mentioned it's town ball. You got to remember the term, town ball, and that was a term that people in my generation know very vividly because everybody had a team. Every town had a team, and that was a town ball league, town ball game, and there was no television. And baseball was number one. Everybody played and knew baseball. The women knew baseball. Well, when you start playing football, a lot of people still don't understand football. They see the ball, but they can't follow it all the time. They're not sure what football's little, it's got 22 players. Baseball, it's one, it's the pitcher and the batter, and then if they hit the ball, somebody else plays. You can follow it. Football is a little tougher. There's too many, 22 players involved. Basketball is a little easier because you see the ball all the time in basketball. Football, a lot of times you don't even see the ball until they unpile. So baseball was an understandable sport for everybody.
So you were playing baseball, basketball, football. And baseball was
nine letters at the University of Minnesota I got, yes.
So with 9 letters, baseball was huge back then. Was there a reason you didn't decide to go play Major League Baseball and that you decided to basically play basketball right out of college?
Well, when they talked to me, they tried to sign me. The White Sox particularly wanted me to go and play professional baseball. Well, number one, I was in college. I thought I wasn't big in education, but I felt maybe an education might be down the line, might be good. And even when I got out of college, the White Sox wanted to sign me. I said, well, if you guarantee I go to the major leagues, I'd consider it. But they want to send me to Mobile or, Little Rock or Midland, Texas, and the minor league. Well, you work your way up. I said, no. Because when I start in football, I'm in the major leagues. I'm, playing with the Eagles. They're a championship team. If I play basketball, I play with the Minneapolis Lakers, a world championship team. If I play baseball, I don't want to end up at Little Rock, playing baseball. No. If you guarantee I'm a Major League Baseball player and I'm going to play in Chicago or, New York or, a Major League team, I would consider it. But they said, well, you got to, work your way up. Well, I said, I don't have to do that because I can play these other sports, and I'm in the big leagues right away.
So you get drafted in the first round by Minnesota with the 14th pick, 4th round pick with the Lakers. Why didn't you just play with the Eagles? Why did you decide to play with the Lakers right out of college?
Well, it was an opportunistic situation where I was playing. I played four years of football at the University of Minnesota. My 4th year, football season's over, I go to the basketball team. Well, this will be my 4th year in basketball at the university. Also, counting Great Lakes, that was a major league, so that might be 5 years. Well, I'd played a lot of basketball. They also had a coaching change. So now instead of, going back to a basketball team that we had a pretty good year my junior year, but a new coach and everything, and the Minneapolis Lakers, of course, are in Minnesota. They had an injury to one of the Laker players in November or whatever it was, and he tore a knee up. Well, after football, I'd take a week off, and then I went deer hunting, and then going back to the basketball team, start practicing. They had an injury. Well, I was a local, I don't want to use the word hero, but a local known quantity, and I was good enough to play at that level, and the Lakers wanted, and I was ready to get out. I mean, this has been my fourth year of college basketball, counting the Lakers, counting the Great Lakes. I had enough of that, and I didn't have any money. I'm broke. Scholarships didn't pay any money. They may have paid my tuition, but I had to make money on the side. They approached me if I would be interested in joining the Lakers. Now, it's getting to be a long story here, but the owner of the Lakers was a guy named Max Winter, a local guy, and one of my very good friends, Sid Hartman, a writer, was working with the Lakers. They petitioned. In those days, you had to spend 4 years in college. It wasn't like today where you can just opt out or move from college to college. In those years, if you enrolled as a freshman, you had to complete 4 years of college before you became eligible to play in a pro league if you were in college. That kept the pros from raiding colleges. Well, that's changed today, of course, because it's all messed up. But in those days, that was the rule. Well, Minnesota petitioned the I'm trying to think of the guy's name. I can't remember. Morris Podloff, I think was the guy's name, in the NBA, that they got a hardship case because I was considering dropping out anyway because I had no money. And the scholarship, the GI Bill had run out. I'd used up all my time, so now I had to pay my own tuition and everything, which sounds absurd today, but that was the way it was. And they petitioned the league, said I got a hardship case, Lakers need a player, Minnesota's got a player that's going to maybe drop out of school, opt out, and maybe we could use it for a publicity standpoint, selling tickets. He's not a number one draft choice or anything like that. He's not going to make or break our team, but he might make our team and help us down the road. And this time, so they petitioned the league to allow me to join the Lakers at that time. That's how I got to be a Minneapolis Laker. I did not play my senior year in college of basketball. I played 3 years, but I opted out my fourth year and played with the Lakers.
So you get drafted by the Eagles, and then they wanted you to play defense. I know you played both ways in college. Yeah. Did you enjoy playing defensive line for the Eagles?
They didn't want me to play defense.
They didn't?
No. I mean, they knew I played defense, but they also knew I could catch the ball, and I was fast. I could run. So they did not slot me in anything. They came make the ball club. I played both ways, and I practiced in training camp. I played on defense. I played on offense. Played half a game on defense, half a game on offense. Caught a lot of passes in the preseason. Played on defense, and whatever I did, I don't know what their evaluation was, but I was prepared, and I thought, well, I'm after going through 6 weeks of training camp, I'm as good or better than the two wide receivers they had. I felt pretty good about my situation, and I would get a chance, and I would eventually be, a wide receiver. Well, they got an injury. I went in on defense, got a couple of sacks, recovered a fumble, played on defensive. They had a 5-man line. I was a wing on a 5-man line on the left side. So I played well enough that they left me there for 1 year. Well, I was good, but not the best. But I felt that I was better than the other two receivers that were playing. So the next year I said, I'm done with defensive end. I'm a wide receiver, and I played my next year as a wide receiver.
You had huge yards back then with 997 yards receiving in your second year in the league.
Well, that was in 12 games, too.
Which would equate to probably like 1,500 nowadays.
Yep. Well, 12 games. And nowadays, they play 16 now or 14 or something.
Exactly. So when you're playing wide receiver there, I mean, the one game you had, 190 some yards receiving the first half?
Yep. I was playing against Dallas the next to the last game. Yep.
How did you accumulate that many yards, against the team? Because back then they weren't passing the ball like they do nowadays, and they actually covered the receivers.
Well, the defenses weren't maybe as sophisticated. As I mentioned earlier, the guy I'm playing against, I'm playing mostly on the left side, and the corner on that side, he couldn't cover my grandmother. So I knew that we knew all this, all in the scouting reports and playing, and we knew this guy wasn't very good. And after running a few plays against him, I told the quarterback, anything you want to throw, I can get open. This guy can't cover me from certain formations. Not every, but every certain formation you go in this. That's just how those things evolve during a game. Now, that was the end of the season. Dallas was not in contention at that time. We were. So it was maybe more, urgency, or maybe we were just a better team than they were.
Then you left the Eagles after your second season. What was the reason for that?
More money.
So I know you had a contract. They thought they had the right to keep renewing the contract, but again, you never signed the contract, right?
I never signed a contract. No, that was just it was a money thing. I mean, nowadays these guys, you read what they're making. Oh, good gracious, it's unbelievable. But it was primarily more money. On the other side of it, living in Philadelphia is not the Garden of Eden, and I'm a Midwestern guy, and I'm living in Philadelphia, and we had good teammates, and we had good teams, and had good times, and had success. But that's not where I wanted to, put any roots down or live. So that all entered in. If I had had gotten married, had a young family, and had whatever your plans are as a what are you going to do with your life? You're not going to play football the rest of your life, so you're looking around. What are you going to do after football or during football, if that's the case? So my options were better here than they were there.
So was that common that contracts weren't signed back then? There was just basically you just took whatever they gave, or was yours a unique situation?
Let me say, I referred to the option. They have a right to an option to pick up your contract at the same price of the year before. That's in the contract. It's a standard league contract. You sign the contract. In the contract, it states they can renew this at the price in the contract or more for another year by notifying you by registered mail or whatever it was. Well, that's standard. Everybody got that, and that was a way for the team to let you know that they're interested in you for the next year. It's just as simple as that. That's what it was. Nobody had done that before. Nobody had played out their option before. I was the first one in the National Football League to ever play out their option, to my knowledge. And I told you, I went to the Burt Bell's office, and I talked to the lawyers, They said, well, yeah, well, it says right here that they renewed it and you got for another year, and you're under contract. You got to play for the Eagles. You can't play for anybody else for 1 year. Well,
so that was your second. So that was your second year, and then after that, you could have done whatever you wanted.
After that, you're free agent. Doesn't say that in the contract, but that's the interpretation of the contract. Once that contract is up, then you're on the street.
But no other NFL team would have won against the Eagles at that time and said, let's sign him as a free agent. So basically, your option was you were a free agent, but really weren't a free agent.
I was the first one in the National Football League to play my 1 year on my option. First one.
Would any other NFL teams have signed you, or did any other NFL teams say, why don't you come sign with us since you're a free agent?
They didn't know I was going to be a free agent.
Oh.
Nobody knew. I didn't advertise it.
Oh,
just between me and the club. I mean, it wasn't a big deal to the club or anybody else. I mean, I wasn't Tom Brady or anything like that.
So what convinced you to go up to the Canadian Football League? I know they were playing football way before the NFL.
Yeah. Money. It's all money, And, we didn't make a lot of money, but for what we were doing, I mean, the difference between $8,000 and $10,000 doesn't sound like much today. Big deal then. Big deal.
And the cost of living was a lot cheaper than in Philadelphia, in Canada, I'm sure.
Everything was, a little bit cheaper than living in Philadelphia. Nothing against Philadelphia. They've got great fans. And they're a little bit boisterous and pretty hard on other teams. But my experience there was not bad. It was not a bad experience. I mean, I played defense for 1 year and I learned a lot, and then I played offense and had a good year, and everything. I had made good friends. I mean, one of my best friends was Chuck Bednarik. When I was out there, we got along. We went hunting together and traveled back and forth to practice together. And I heard all the war stories. He was in the war and was on a bomber as a waist gunner, and flew 25 missions and then 10 more, and he survived. And so we spent a lot of time. I had good friends in Philadelphia, and a lot of those contacts I used as friends that got into coaching and what later on. So, my experience in Philadelphia was not wasted.
So when you went to Canada, you continued to play wide receiver. Did you play any defense with the Bombers?
Both ways, every game. Both ways. I played a corner. I moved back from the outside linebacker back to a corner. Played left corner, and I could run and I could tackle, and there's less wear and tear playing corner than there is playing the linebacker. I'll tell you that.
I see that you had 5 interceptions in a playoff game in Canada, which was a record.
It still is.
It still is a record.
In North American football, not only Canada, but National Football League too.
Do you remember
That's a record. Nobody's ever intercepted 5 passes in a game in either Canadian football or American football. That's a standing record right now.
Do you remember who the quarterback was of the other team?
The other team's quarterback was the name of Frank Filchuk.
Oh,
now he played with the New York Giants prior to going to Saskatchewan. He played at Regina. This was a playoff game too. It wasn't just it was a playoff game. And Frank Filchuk had played with the Giants, and he came to Canada for more money. I don't know how he got out of his contract, but he came to Regina and played there for more money than he was making with the New York Giants at that time. Remember, there's no television. So there was no television revenue, so the Canadian football I mentioned earlier could pay more money for certain players than the National Football League was paying. And there was a number of us that were up there. Max Speedy, for example, from Cleveland, the great receiver. He jumped. He played for Regina for more money than he made with the Cleveland Browns. So anyway, that's another side of the story. But so there was Frank Filchuk, and I remember now, you bring back a memory, I was playing left corner, which is, a lot of action out there. But playing Filchuk, and we do our scouting reports and everything, and I knew Filchuk from playing against him twice with Philadelphia, that certain traits he had, and he liked to throw deep. He always looked the other way, tried to look you off with his eyes, and all that kind of scouting stuff. So when I went to the coach, I said, I played against Filchuk before, and we played him a couple times that year. I said, if I played safety, I think I might be able to, try to recognize what they're trying to do and where they're going to throw the ball. Well, it just turned out that we had good pressure and he had to get rid of the ball. Anyway, I got 5 interceptions in a playoff game against Regina, and Frank Filchuk was the quarterback. The whole game.
You mentioned that you had a former NFL player as your coach in Canada. Did that help?
Say what?
Who was your coach in Canada?
Well, we had a guy by the name of George Trafton, who was a Chicago Bear all-time great, and he came to Canada. He was there when I was there. Then we had Allie Sherman. I don't know if that name means anything to you.
He was the Giants coach in the early '60s.
That's right. He was a Giants coach. He's a quarterback. He played a backup quarterback at Philadelphia. Then he went to the Giants. Then he was a head coach. Then he ended up in Winnipeg. So,
how did the Canadian players take to former NFL players coaching them? Were they okay with that, or did they feel like it was an outsider?
They were fine. No, they were fine. There was no problem. The difference is that you had to have so many Canadian players, and sometimes the Canadian player did not have the experience that a player who played 4 years of college ball, or dropped out of college, could come to Canada. The depth of quality was not as good, but for the top, I would say, a roster, let's say, is 35 guys. Well, the top half of them were top caliber, could play in either league. And the bottom was maybe some Canadian kids that were coming along that, hadn't played in college, major colleges that were brought in. But a lot of them were every bit as good or better than some of the Americans you brought in. But the depth of quality wasn't quite as good in Canada as it was in the National Football League. Although, when I was in Winnipeg, we had a number of second, third, and fourth round draft choices that came to Canada that chose to come up there for more money than playing in the National Football League.
You mentioned that a lot of players didn't like playing for Allie Sherman, and that you kind of basically told them, listen, he's the coach, let's play for him.
That's right. Well, he was he's a Jewish guy, a nice guy. I got along with Al. I was one of his favorite guys, only because I played at a high level, I suppose. But he was emotional, and he had coaches sometimes get a personality change when they get from an assistant coach to a head coach. And all of a sudden they're the boss, and sometimes that's a personality change. He wanted instant success, and we weren't that good that he could beat everybody. He'd get very upset when we lost, and he kind of spread the blame around a little bit. And coaches are different, and we're not cut out of the same mold. We're all different. So he had a little tough time in a very conservative part of the world at that time.
I know when I talked to Sam Huff years ago, he mentioned Allie Sherman. He was not a big fan. He goes, listen, we had Vince Lombardi and we had Tom Landry as our coaches. And who did the Giants pick as the head coach to replace previous one, they pick Allie Sherman. He goes, we had a choice of 2 Hall of Famers, and they go with Allie Sherman. He goes, it was the worst mistake they ever made.
Well, because he changed. Because Allie was a smart guy. He really knew football. You could sit down on a blackboard with him, and he can regale you with every scheme or defense there is, and he could do all that. That doesn't mean a dang thing unless you got the players, or you can communicate with the players what you're trying to do. Allie had, just a little bit. He had a tough time communicating when he got to be a head coach. Other than that, he was a great guy.
So how did you end up being?
I get along well with him.
So how did you end up becoming the head coach of Winnipeg then?
Well, they fired Sherman.
Did you petition for it, or did they?
No, I had no idea. I told you I was playing in an All-Star game in Vancouver. They called me and said, on your way back through Winnipeg, that was at the end of the season now, not the beginning. This is the end of an All-Star game at the end of the season, and it was a fundraiser for the Shriners. So they said, stop back, and we want to talk to you. Well, I figured, I said, what about? Well, we'll talk to you when you get here, but we want to make sure you talk to you before you go back from Winnipeg to Minneapolis. I figured, as I mentioned earlier, I might have been traded or, whatever. I didn't know. I had no idea. We played the game. I scored 2 touchdowns in the game. And I mentioned earlier, and this is a traumatic part of my life, the airplane that we were scheduled to come back on, which I changed at the last minute to get on a wait list to get on an earlier flight. The one that we were originally scheduled on took off in Vancouver and hit a mountain. Everybody got killed. I was just maybe a minute away from being on that airplane when they called me and said, Mr. Grant, you have been let you know that there is a space on this earlier flight. If you'd like that, you're on the wait list. I said, put me on that and take all of us off that later flight and be on the earlier flight, which we did. And I've got a couple of guys that I could never buy another drink for because I got them off of that flight into the earlier flight, and we weren't on the flight to hit the mountain and killed everybody.
It gives you a different perspective on life when something like that happens.
Well, I tell you, it was a very your fate is in somebody else's hands. But if I was going out the door and they called me and said you changed your flight to the earlier flight, that saved my life and all the rest of these guys.
So then you went and you interviewed for the job with Winnipeg.
Well, they asked when I got to Winnipeg. Then they told me, Sherman has been fired that week before, which I knew, but I didn't think about coaching. And they said, we'd like you to consider coaching, being a player coach. Well, I said, first of all, it's not a good time because of what just happened with this airplane, and we were all still, had the effects of that. In addition, my father passed away that week. And I said, that's another try. In the meantime, by moving my family from Winnipeg to Minneapolis, I said, you got to give me some time to think about this. So a week later, we talked about it, yeah.
So then you end up coaching. You took 6 Grey Cups you went to, and you won 4 of them.
Yeah.
Why do you think you were so successful in Canada? Was it just the players you had? Was it your scheme, or was it everything?
We had better players. I worked harder at recruiting players than I did, X's and O's. X's and O's, anybody can do those. You can buy a book, of plays, and you can't win if the other team's got better players than you got. So you don't win with football knowledge. I mean, there's a certain part of it that you you recognize talent and you observe talent and you put them in the right spots. But your players got to be better than their players in, more times than not if you're going to win. Coaches aren't going to win. I mean, the coaching selections today is a lot easier because they've got 20 assistants, so they can evaluate everybody, and I mean they know what foot they put the sock on. They put on the left foot or right foot. They know all of that. That's how they evaluate people, and that's just the way it is. The coaches don't win, the players win.
Did the coaches in Canada, like you, did you recruit the players you wanted, or was it the GM?
Yes, I was in charge of recruiting. That was part of my. I felt I had some contacts at that time, having played in the league and having played in the Big Ten and having a lot of teammates and friends and around. And I went to all the coaches' conventions and I talked to them, made myself available, talked to coaches. Brought them presents, did all that kind of coachy stuff, and so I felt I could outwork anybody in terms of recruiting, and I did, and we got the best players, and we won.
Because you had limits on how many American players you could have. Was it
That's
6?
Right. Yeah, very selective. You had to be very selective. That's right.
So when you recruited, did you try to get kids right out of American colleges?
Right out of college, absolutely, yeah. We had a lot of second, third, and fourth round draft choices. We brought them to Winnipeg. They didn't go to San Francisco or Miami or New York.
So you could offer more money.
And conditions. I mean, everybody's got a hook. I mean, for example, the kid we had one. Let's see. We had one kid from Minnesota. He was a captain in Minnesota, drafted by Green Bay in the third round, but he wanted to go to law school. So I made arrangements for him to go to law school and missed part of a little bit of training camp. Played 3 years, all Canadian. Then he went into he graduated from law school, became CEO of what's the name of the company anyway. Became a multimillionaire, and but he was a great player and smart kid, so others had retreat other kids that played for 10 years, and became, we had one kid from Iowa, a second round draft choice, came to Winnipeg, played 10 years in Winnipeg. Went to Vancouver, became one of the top broadcasters in Canada. So they got other lives too. You're working with not only football life, private life, married life, everything. You gotta keep them all happy.
So when the Vikings franchise started, I saw they wanted you to be their original coach. Why didn't you take the job right when the organization started?
I think I explained that to you the other day, that I looked at, I didn't have to look very far, but I mean, I looked, coaches, and there was expanding teams in those days because they did not have the West Coast, was not part of the NFL early on. So, but I looked at down the line, well, new coaches don't do very well for expansion teams or, for change in ownership for franchises. That coach doesn't do very well. It's the guy that comes behind him that has success that he's built, but he gets fired because he hasn't won enough. So I figured, well, I'm not going to be, a one and done kind of guy. I got a good thing going in Winnipeg. I don't have to go to, I got a family. I mean, that's I'm a football coach, but most of all, I'm a husband and a father and a family guy. That's my number one job. Football coach was what I did, but that's not who I was.
You mentioned that. When he becomes a Viking coach, they fire him. And Jim Finks was the general manager of the Vikings. Did Jim really recruit you to join the Vikings?
Did who?
With Jim Finks.
Well, yeah, because I'd known Jim. When I played, he was at Pittsburgh when I was at Philadelphia, and I'd met him down the road. Then he went to Calgary for more money as a quarterback. He'd played in the NFL at Pittsburgh.
Right.
He went to Calgary for more money. Well, he got up there and he got hurt. Well, he took over helping coaching then, and then they saw that he had managerial ability. Another year coach, and he was general manager in Calgary.
So what was Jim Finks like? Was he a great personnel guy?
I tell you, he was a great athlete, number one. He came out of Illinois somewhere, and he played at Tulsa, was it, or early? Anyway, he was a great quarterback. He was a great baseball player. He could play basketball. I didn't play at a high level, but I played with him enough to horsing around. He was a very, very good athlete. Very smart, and on top of that, he's very, very competitive. So he made all those ingredients helped him as a player, and then later on as a coach and as a general manager. He had
talent, though. He got some great talent with the Vikings.
Well, he was a competitor, and he recognized. See, sometimes it's not what you know; it's a guy that works for you what he knows. You follow what I'm saying? That
yes.
If you hire the right players, but you also can hire the right management. You can hire the right scouts. You can hire the right people that do a lot of your work, and give you the information. So he hired good help, and he evaluated players and made, good decisions, And I tell my kids, I said, hey, all you got to do in your life is make good decisions. There's right and I used to use their mother. I mentioned, we don't have any religion in our family, but I said, just watch your mother. And her favorite saying was, hey, there's right and there's wrong, and you better know the difference. That's, simple as that. Anyway, Finks, he could make good decisions. He compile information and make the right decision. A lot of people in our business got big egos, and a lot of their decisions are based on their ego. How's it going to look? How am I going to look? Well, you can't look at it that way. But a lot of people in the coaching business also have big egos, and they want to look good. Not only want to beat you, but they want to look good. They and there's nothing the matter with ego. I mean,
how hard was that on you, knowing that you're going to Minnesota and now you really have to basically work with a new quarterback in Joe Kapp?
Well, they traded him before I got here. If I'd have been here, we would never traded him. But they traded him, and that was, so when I got here, I said, well, we're going to start. We got a great nucleus, but we need a quarterback, and I knew of Kapp, played in Canada, I guess, so great competitor, and so I said we need, but it may be a short-term guy because of his volatility and whatnot. I said, so we got Kapp. Finks had been in Canada. He knew Kapp. So, we got Joe Kapp. Well, Joe, he screwed up a little bit, so we went to New York and we got targeted because Tarkenton had a hard time getting along with the people in New York. So we got Tarkenton. Well, that was, of course, at the time that he retired, he was the best quarterback in the National Football League.
So when you made Super Bowl IV against the Chiefs, playing in that game, was that like the biggest moment of your career up until that point, or was it just another game?
Well, the Super Bowl isn't what it is today, but it was, the pinnacle. I mean, super. I mentioned they call it super because it's one game, winner take all. But it's in your career. People talk. You got to learn how to lose. before you learn how to win. In other words, you can't be devastated by losing. I mean, you can't. The world doesn't come to an end. What you're talking about is entertainment, and what you do is important at the time, and it goes in the record books, and it's referred to, and it's you benefit from it, but you got to learn to get over losing if you're going to continue in the business of playing or coaching. You can't be go shoot yourself if you lose a ball game. You've got to learn how to lose. Now that somehow doesn't sound right when you say you learn how to lose, but you got to learn how to live with losing without losing your composure and your philosophy or your whatever the thing got you where you're at. You can't say you got to throw them on a trash can and start over again. No, you lose. I mean, I mentioned to you before, we lost to Kansas City. We come back the next year. We beat them badly the first game of the year. The same team, exactly the same team. Football, Super Bowl is one game, winner take all. That's why they got super.
No, you're right. You mentioned the Dolphin game in the Super Bowl. They go in there undefeated, and you had beaten them during the regular season. They won the Super Bowl. Everybody thinks of them as the only undefeated team, but if they would have lost that Super Bowl game, they would have been just another Super Bowl participant.
And we almost beat them that year. I mentioned that we played them in Minnesota. We were ahead by 2 points going, and they were down about midfield. We had them third down and long, and we get a pass interference downfield. They threw a long pass, desperation, not a Hail Mary, but desperation pass. Get pass interference, kick a field goal with seconds to go, and beat us by 1 point. Otherwise, they weren't undefeated. So, football it's a funny shape, takes funny bounces, and you got to go along with the flow. I mean, if you want to make a living out of football, you got to recognize all that. If it's just an ego trip with you, or you want to be a big shot or something, then maybe you're in the wrong business.
You played in 4 Super Bowls. You lost 4. Marv Levy was in 4 Super Bowls, lost 4. Do you think that if the NFL was like the other major sports where the game was played in one of the cities of the teams in the game, like if those games had been played in Minnesota, do you think you would have probably won a couple of those games because of the weather?
No. The weather, they make a lot about the weather because they're running out of things to write about. They talk about the weather, but no, everybody's learned to adapt, to the weather. I don't think that would make any difference.
In '69, Ron Yari was the first pick in the draft, and you guys got Ron Yari. Was there any temptation to take OJ over Yari?
Well, we had some good running backs. OJ was a consideration, but it's what your needs are is really what you're drafting for. And we needed a couple of offensive linemen. Ed White, Ron Yari made our offensive line functional with Mick Fingelhoff, and so no, I don't recall where that was a major decision.
You had the Purple People Eaters. I mean, you were known for that defense with Page and Carl Eller and Jim Marshall, and I think Gary Larson was the 4th one.
Doug Sutherland was also that. More than Larson.
Yeah. So you had those guys. What made that defensive line so tough? Was it just the talent they had, or was it the scheme? Or
they were the best players. We had the best players. I mean, we drafted Alan Page. Now, if we had known that Alan Page was going to be quite as good as he was, we would have drafted him earlier in the first round because we had a couple of picks before him. But Page was a defensive end in college. We moved him inside, and that he was a great player, had great instincts, and he fit with the other members of that team, that group, But Jim Marshall was the glue in that club, that operation. He was a super player.
Was he the leader of the defense?
Yes. The first thing I did when I came down from Canada and I looked at all this film and talked to the players, the first meeting we had, I said, okay, you got to first going to our appoint new captains. Well, they used to have captains per game, and I said, our captain is Jim Marshall. And on offense is Mick Tinglehoff. They were the captains their whole careers. Jim Marshall was here for 19 years. Played 19 years at a high level, never missed a game, durable. Tinglehoff the same way, never missed a game, played every down. So they were our captains. They were surprised. In fact, Marshall come up to me and said, "Hey, Coach, I'm captain. I've never been captain before." I said, "I know, but you're the leader of this group, and you're the best player we got, and you're the captain."
I know Ron Yari mentioned that it was tough blocking for Fran Tarkington because he was constantly running, not staying in the pocket. Did you ever tell Fran stay in the pocket more? It'll make it easier on the lineman, or you just figure let him do?
No. You're gonna tell Mahomes to stay in the pocket? No, you do what you do best.
You mentioned Fran Tarkington's height. I always think he was like 6'2", but you said he was under 6 feet tall.
He was 5'10" and 3/4.
So if he stayed in the pocket, he wouldn't have been able to get it over the line a lot of times.
Well, you got to be able to see. You got to be able to see. You know, these guys are all standing up in front of you. So if you can't see, I mean, a lot of your pass plays are, you got to throw within 2 or 3 seconds. Well, all of a sudden you can't see. You can't throw the ball through the back of a guy's head. So you got to move to the side to see a little bit. Well, that takes another second. Well, then pretty soon you're out here. Another 2 seconds, you're on this. So it was just a matter of if a lot of our passes we changed for Tarkington and get rid of the ball quicker. Get rid of the ball quicker so those guys aren't in your face all the time. But if you don't get the ball quick, then get out of there. We worked at it. He worked at it. He's a super competitor, is highly intelligent, and a better arm than most people realize.
You had some great defensive coaches. You had Neil Armstrong and Buddy Ryan. Did you have any idea that Buddy Ryan was going to revolutionize defenses when he was with you?
Well, we talked a lot of defense because I spent a lot of time with the defense, and I had to curtail him a little bit. He had a lot of schemes which he brought to Chicago and used them there. I said, Buddy, you don't have to do that here. We got Marshall, Eller, Page, Sutherland, or Gary Larson. Those 4 guys will rush the passer. We don't need all those blitzes and all those things now because we don't need them now. Down the road we might, but right now we don't need them. So we had a lot of that discussion. And when I came from Canada, I used the zone defense more than anybody had ever used before down here. So we put in more zones. And anyway, so Buddy was fine with that. But he went to Chicago, and well, then they didn't have the same defensive lineman that we had that could rush the quarterback with 4 guys. He had to bring all kinds of stunts and plays, and so he put that in Chicago and did a very good job with it.
How would you compare the Purple People Eaters with the '85 Bears defense? You coached against them. Were they similar? You can't.
I can't do that.
It's like comparing your kids.
I don't know the Bears that well.
With Paul Krause is the all-time leader in interceptions. Did your defense allow him to do that, or was it just his sheer talent and smarts?
Combination. First of all, Paul's a good athlete. He had very good hands. He was a good golfer. He could hit. He was a good basketball player. He knocked his shoulder down real bad in college, so he couldn't play baseball. He was also a good baseball player. His right shoulder, he couldn't throw the ball anymore. So anyway, but he's got great instinct. And as I mentioned earlier, when I came from Canada, I'd used a lot of zone defenses up there, and I came down here. They didn't use the zone very much like they do today. So I brought the zone defense into our thing. We'll rush with 4 guys, cover the zones, and that's our defense. We don't have to blitz to get to the quarterback. We're good enough to rush with 4 and play a zone defense. Krause was ideal because in those days they had a term they called a free safety. They don't call it free safety anymore. But the safety used to be the kind of the odd, you cover both receivers with the corners and the tight end with the safety, and then you had another safety in there somewhere. You could move them around. Well, we used to do it on a man-to-man basis, but we used it as a zone. He was our center fielder. Now, he could do that because he had great instinct, and he recognized formations and all the other things that go along with it. So his anticipation to pass plays and recognition was excellent. So with the rush we had, we played a zone. So that meant that he could go anywhere on the field depending on what the formation they provided us, but he was a free safety. So he was free to go. I went to a lot of different places. And if we had a double on a receiver, we'd double with the free safety a lot of times and disguise it, and then he'd step over and make an interception. Great instinct. I mean, it's a term that I use a lot that our scouts don't. They say we run so fast, jump so high, and all. So I say, hey, what's their instinct? And they say, what's instinct? I say, well, it's something you can't put down on paper, but you could observe it. You know people who have instinct. Some of the scouts knew what I was talking about. Some of them, a lot of them didn't. But I know what instinct is, and Paul Krause had great instinct.
But he never
and good hands and a good athlete.
But he never had 5 interceptions in a game.
No, I got that record.
Did you ever tell him, Paul, you might be good, but I had a better game than you?
Yeah, I say you might be good, but you'll never be that good.
Alan Page won MVP as a defensive player, which only one other player has done at Lawrence Taylor. How dominant was he during that year?
Well, he was dominant as long as he played, and he was. I just used the word instinct. And next to Krause or with Krause, he had the great instinct also. In other words, we'd line up 4 guys. Well, we had little stunts we used, and little gaps, and all the coaching techniques you use, and there'd be certain things. Well, your line charge is supposed to be on the outside shoulder of this tackle. All of a sudden, the player runs. He's gone inside, and you'd say, "Well, Alan, why did you do?" And he'd make the play. He'd make a play where he wasn't even supposed to be. He couldn't tell you. All he knew was when the ball was snapped, he had an instinct to where it was going because of whatever was happening in front of him. He had absolute great instinct. That's why we moved him. When we drafted him out of Notre Dame, he was an end. Well, he made a lot of plays from there, but he made more plays when we moved him inside because he was in on every play. And he just had a great instinct, and he had good, strong hands. Hard to knock him down, good balance, good athlete, always in good shape. He's just a dominant player.
How did you know when it was time to retire?
How did what?
How did you know when it was time to retire as a coach?
Well, the short answer to that is when my youngest son, we had 6 children, graduated from college. He went to St. John's, which is a local college here. He graduated from college. That meant I had 6 kids, all graduated from college, which my wife or I, neither one graduated from college. And one of our main objectives was to make sure our kids were well educated, well cared for, well fed, and healthy. When Dan graduated from college, Now, my family responsibilities were over. I'd worked 7 days a week, long hours for many years, and, one of the reasons I felt I was successful was I outworked everybody. I put more attention to it, and I was not a carouser. I didn't drink or smoke or chase women or, like a lot of, I'm not trying to put anybody down, but everybody got a different lifestyle. And mine was not necessarily, sounds terrible, but my family was my most important thing. And I spent more time with them than a lot of coaches did who spent time on the road, whatever they did, I don't know. But I would outwork them, and I felt I had some kind of an ability to recognize talents and whatnot. But when I talked to my wife, we talked about, before we got married, we were engaged for a while, and how many kids we're going to have and all this, all the plans that you do when you go through that. And I said, well, we want 4 kids. Well, we had 4. I did a good job. We'll have 1 more. Well, now that gave us 3 boys and 2 girls. Now we've got to even that up, so we have 1 more. So we got 6 kids now, but it didn't turn out. The last one was a boy, too. So anyway, so that was the end. But anyway, we got them all through college. They had no student debts. They all did college work. They all graduated. They all had a great home life, a very stable life, and a loving family. And I said, well, we've taken care of that obligation. Now let's take care of us. So I retired and spent time being a grandfather and try to do the same there without interfering with their, relationships or their families or whatnot. And, enjoy the fruits of our endeavors. Unfortunately, my wife got Parkinson's.
Mm-hmm.
So the last, maybe 8 years or so was not what we'd planned on. So I spent those years taking care of, making sure that she was as comfortable and as happy and as she could. And my family all were very close to their mother. So all the kids live right here. They're all within 45 minutes of my house right now. All of them, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and children. So that's how I decided. When Dan graduated from college, I said, that's it. I'm getting off the treadmill and going to enjoying the fruits of our endeavors.
How did it feel like when you found out you got into the Pro Football Hall of Fame?
Well, it's I played in maybe 3 Hall of Fame games, or maybe 2. I don't know, 2 or 3. We were in Canton, played the games and everything. I kind of went, but you're so busy you don't pay a lot of attention, other than you recognize the names and we were involved in the game, so we weren't involved in the festivities necessarily. We were involved in the game. Well, as it came later in my career, then you see what it's meant to some of these players that get in the Hall of Fame. Well, when it came my time, it was a very humbling experience because I was in it long enough to have the history of the Hall of Fame. And by the way, in Superior, Wisconsin, the New York Giants used to have their training camp in Superior, Wisconsin. That was their training camp. They'd come from New York to Superior for about 6 weeks. So I spent my whole younger years chasing around the Giants training camp and whatever kids do around training camps anyway. So anyway, I knew about, Hall of Fame players. Green Bay was big, Cecil Isbell and Don Hudson and all those great players. Anyway, it finally dawns on you, well, you're a part of this. Yeah, it wasn't that important when I was working, but after I'm out of it and looking back, yeah, it's quite an honor. It's very kind of an emotional reaction when you get into the Hall of Fame. And then when you get there, and spend some time there. When we played the games, we just went in and played, went out. But now we go there, and you go and you see the history of the National Football League, and from being from Superior and knowing about the Giants at Green Bay and all that, I had some background and some history. But to see and to be a part of all of that, it's a humbling experience. It's an emotional time.
I hope they put Jim Marshall in before he dies, because he should be able to enjoy the honor.
That's my biggest. I've written letters, talked to those people who inductees or inductors, and I tell them the same stories. And I said that if you put the face on the Minnesota Vikings, you put one guy on the front, it would be Jim Marshall. He's the best player, the best representative the Vikings have ever had. He should be in the Hall of Fame, no question about it. He's the top Viking.